I'm Jim Knight, co-founder of the Instructional Coaching Group, and you're listening to Coaching Conversations, where I talk with coaching experts from around the world so that all of us can learn better ways to make an unmistakably positive impact on the people around us. Super excited to have this conversation. One of my favorite people, Christian van Nieuwerburgh, and soon to be one of my favorite people, Robert Biswas-Diener, both doctors studying variety aspects of coaching, both giants in the field of coaching. I think, Robert, I keep hearing you referred to as the Indiana Jones of coaching, and I hear you're Snuffy or some dog or something. Is that what your analogy is? I can't remember what it is. Whitey, is that what it is?
No, it's not Snuffy. It's not Snuffy. But yeah, Tintin.
Tintin, but not Tintin, but Tintin's dog is the way the conversation went that I saw at any rate. But
Snowy.
Snowy.
Yeah.
Snowy. Oh, there you go. Okay. I think you're still not happy about that Snowy comparison. I think you want to be
I'm not.
No.
Yeah.
Anyway, I thought maybe we could start with you guys introducing each other, if you don't mind. So, Christian, why don't you introduce Robert, and Robert will return the favor.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Robert, known as the Indiana Jones of positive psychology. And that's because of his huge contribution to the field of positive psychology. Robert is a leading figure when it comes to promoting positive psychology and coaching in the field of positive psychology, coaching as well. He's written, I think, probably over 100 articles, something like that. So he's made a huge contribution to our field. And the best thing is, Robert has been a great learning partner for me, Jim. Robert and I really started to get in touch during the pandemic so that we could stay learning and thinking together. And Robert's been a wonderful thinking partner and collaborator. And one of the outputs of that co-design and thinking is radical listening. So welcome, Robert.
Yeah, thanks so much, Christian. And for those who don't know Christian, he's pretty extraordinary. I think he would say that one of his primary areas of interest, especially within coaching, is how you show up, your way of being. And I can think of few people who are better exemplars of a way of being than is Christian. He demonstrates on a consistent basis how thoughtful and, more importantly, how respectful he is. You get that loud and clear when you interact with him. I think his clients get that loud and clear. And I've learned a lot from him. Most notably, it's not enough to be a certain way. You have to demonstrate that you're that way. That is, you have to actually get it across to the other person. And I think he does that admirably.
Wonderful. Well, it's great to have you both here. I'm super excited. I've been waiting for this conversation a long time. I've read the book with great care, so I'm excited to dive into radical listening. And I thought I'd ask you first, every book kind of has a story. What's the story of this book? How did it come to be?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, Jim, first of all, thank you for inviting us to speak to you. It is genuinely an honor for you to read our book. I know you're a voracious reader, but you read excellent books. And so for you to consider reading our book, I'm very grateful to you for that, Jim. The book does have a story, which is that, as I mentioned at the start, Robert and I, we used to bump into each other, in fact, at conferences on positive psychology or coaching in different parts of the world. And those would be highlights for me because I love hanging out with people who are interested in coaching and positive psychology. But I'd get to meet superstars like Robert Biswas-Diener. And if we're sharing a stage, it gave us a chance just to have those little side conversations in between sessions, in green rooms, in those kind of places. And I used to really look forward to those conversations. And, the pandemic suddenly stopped all of that. Robert lives in Portland, Oregon. I was in England. So suddenly those chance meetings stopped happening. And I'm not sure what initiated it or who initiated it, but I'm just so grateful that one of us reached out to the other and said, "Hey, do you just want to check in once in a while and talk about stuff?" And we're both interested in the uh, the integration of coaching and positive psychology. And we started talking about those things. We ended up developing some online courses around some of the things that we were most interested in. And then we had this opportunity to think about, would we like to write a book together? And, Barrett Kohler, their wonderful publisher, Robert had just published Positive Provocations with that publisher. And he just happened to mention to the editor, he said, if you're interested in listening as a topic, my good colleague Christian, he talks a lot about that. And the publisher was interested in it. And it was an interesting scenario where the opportunity was to write a book about listening. It's not that Robert and I both said we want to write a book about listening. There was an opportunity to write a book about listening. And that's when we just started chatting and thinking, what do we have to contribute in this area? And because it's so central to coaching, as you know, Jim, and your listeners will know, for us to really delve deeply into listening was such a wonderful opportunity. And I think Robert and I both kind of jumped at the chance because we both felt there's so much we're going to learn from one another in the process of writing the book.
I'm wondering why radical listening? Why not effective listening, or why that title? Actually, radical listening sounds way better than effective listening. But anyway, what do you think of the title?
Well, radical listening as an adjective, radical, does have, I think, or an adverb rather, does have a little bit more of, I think, a dynamic kind of feel to it, but it also makes a claim of sorts. So it's a bit of a risk to put that out there because readers will wonder, well, is this truly radical? Are you presenting something fresh? What does radical mean? And we don't mean shocking. I want to put that out right now. People aren't going to, have their glasses, be askew on their face just with exclamation points coming off their head. Like, I can't believe that I read such a book. But it is radical in that it deepens, extends, and perhaps pivots from some of the traditional notions. So we all kind of know the classic approaches to listening, that you should summarize what someone says, that you should make eye contact, that you should ask some clarifying questions. And I think those work well enough. I think they're effective, and that's why they endure. But I also would challenge you to think about a single time that you've ever done that with a friend of yours. And I would hazard a guess that you haven't. Your friend comes over and they're like, oh, it's my birthday today. And you're like, well, just so I understand that I'm reading you correctly, I just want to make sure that I understand that you were born on this day, but years ago, and you're eager to celebrate it. Do I have that right? It would feel artificial in most contexts. And so already that artifice is something that didn't sit well with me personally. And so we were looking for ways that we might fill around those sort of traditional modes of listening. And we were saying, do we have something fresh to say? Can we add some angles? And I think that's the radical approach. Not that we're doing away with old or traditional ways of listening, but that we hope to extend it and freshen it.
Mm. Well, it sounds like it's authentic listening, but that doesn't quite capture it. And then I'm wondering positive provocations, radical listening, I think maybe we're just poking the bear just a little bit with these titles. I'm not really sure, but it's we have a thing called radical learners. So we use the term to mean something exceptional. Something a radical is kind of an outlier, but an outlier for good reasons, if that makes sense. So maybe what we're talking about here is a special kind of listening, or more authentic kind of listening. But anyway, I think what I'm doing is just what you said I shouldn't do, which is to paraphrase. So do I have that right? We're going to move on. So Christian, a big part of the book is the idea of intentionality. And it seems like an intentional listener A radical listener is very intentional about what they do. And
Mm.
could you say a bit about how that plays out in your writing together?
Yeah, I'm just going to build on that point you just made, Jim, about a special kind of listening. Yeah, it is radical because it's a kind of listening that's designed to make the person who's been listened to feel seen, valued, and heard. So that's what's radical, is that the intervention of listening is used as a way of building connection with people. And so, of course, then intention does become important. And so when we're talking about intention, it's really even before you start a conversation with someone, thinking about what's my positive intention for this interaction. And that leads us in our writing to talk about different motives for listening. And this is an interesting thing to explore. And even for our listeners, even now, just to check in and think, usually when I get into a listening situation, what is the motive that I'm bringing to it? Now, of course, here we're hoping that the people listening to this are listening because they're curious or they want to learn. So for us, one of the motives is the motive of listening to learn. So that's an example of a motive. And what we argue, Jim, is that if we are able to think of an intention, which is, for example, to learn, then it focuses our attention on the things that are going to be most helpful for our learning. So in this example, people listening here, they might be listening out for, what do I already know about this topic that they're talking about? Because that reinforces what they know. But they may also be thinking, what's new? What are the new things that I might be able to pick up? So it's a bit of an example here of, if that is the intention, to learn. But we've got what we call some pro-social intentions. And those pro-social intentions include relating to someone, for example. So imagine that you could think, I'm going to go and listen to this person because I really want to strengthen our relationship. And I do think that's a radical idea. We're not going to go and listen to them because we want to understand something. We're not going to go listen to them because we want to help them solve something. We just want to listen to them because we want to build a relationship. And again, if that's my intention, I'm going to be more likely to pick up what's similar between us. What words have they used? And maybe I play those words back. What are shared interests we might have? So that's the idea of listening with the purpose of relating. Now, I just want to share one more intention, because this really unlocks one of the things that I think listeners will really be able to relate to. So one motive is listening to solve. So what that would mean is a colleague or a friend of yours has come to you with a problem, and you obviously don't want to see them in discomfort, so you're listening because you really want to solve it for them. Now, that is a pro-social intention. I want to help my friend or colleague. So you're listening as they're talking about things, you're making connections in your head, you're sharing ideas that you think might be useful for them. And that would be great if that's what the person you're listening to is looking for. And so we also talk about this idea of optimal matching, making sure that the kind of listening we're doing matches with the kind of listening that your conversational partner wants. Now, I know many people will associate with this, but if your conversational partner, for example, has had a really difficult day at work, or has just had a really, let's say, heated argument with someone, they're coming back and saying, oh, I can't believe it. This thing happened. I don't know how it happened. And they said this and I said that. Sometimes people just want to be acknowledged. Sometimes people just want a chance to talk to somebody who'll say, oh, wow, that sounds really tough. And in this case, if I'm listening to solve and what's wanted is acknowledgement, we would argue that that could even lead to conflict. So that's just a little insight into the importance of thinking about our intention, but maybe also, more importantly, making sure there's a match between the kind of listening that's wanted and the kind of listening we're providing.
Yeah, alignment, I guess, is the word I would use, alignment. But you got some snappy phrase for this. What is it? Intention leads to attention. What's the phrase, Christian?
Yeah, this phrase has come up when Robert and I have been just talking about this, and we've been invited onto podcasts such as this one, and it just came out of our talking, which is intention leads to attention, and that's such a good way of people remembering the value of it. So, having a positive intention going into a conversation, that's probably good in itself. That's a great way to go into conversations. But then also remembering that it has a function. When I go in with an intention, it means that I'm more likely to notice certain things that are going to be helpful for me in that conversation.
And then to some extent, you mediate it for optimal matching. And that's where noticing comes in. Now, your book has 6 skills, if I remember correctly, lots of skills laid out. And I really wanted you to talk about all of them, but you graciously wrote back and said that would take us about 2 hours, Jim. So how about we just pick a few? So what are a couple of skills that both of you think you'd like to highlight? 1 or 2 skills each.
I'd kind of like to highlight accepting as a skill. I think acceptance can be very difficult for people. I think it's non-controversial to suggest that we live in societies that feel more fractured socially, that people have stronger opinions or more divisive opinions than at any time in history, perhaps. And so there can be difficulty just in engaging with someone with a degree of acceptance. So to disentangle what acceptance means, it doesn't mean agreement. And in order to accept a person, your conversational partner, what they're saying, what you're accepting first and foremost is their right to an opinion. Again, you don't have to agree with the opinion, but it's sort of a very pro-social attitude that I acknowledge that you're an adult human with decades of life experience, lots of wisdom. You're probably about as smart as I am. And so you have a right to come up with whatever you came up with. I might not share the values behind it. I might share the values behind it, but I recognize that you have a point of view. And I think there's a kind of intellectual humility that goes with that. And I think that is a core skill in acceptance, is realizing the limits of our own beliefs, that we aren't taking in all the information, that our values are just a few values among many, that we are biased inherently, that we have limitations. And so, yes, we love what we believe, but we also kind of have to be a bit humble about it. What this hinges on, however, is that you want to have a relationship with the person you're talking to. If you meet someone at a cocktail party and they're espousing something you disagree with, it's easy enough just to walk away because you have no investment in a long-term relationship with them. If it's a family member who you actually care about and you do want to have a good relationship, then this form of acceptance, I don't agree with you, but you have a right to what you think. I don't know everything. And also accepting the situation. This is where we are right now. This is where we are in our thinking. Your thinking will probably evolve over time. My thinking will evolve over time, but I just accept the state of play right now. So I think that these are things that can help make that difficult pill of acceptance an easier pill to swallow. But I will be the first to admit it's a hard pill to swallow no matter what you do.
I accept you as a person. I accept your right to have your own opinions. Is that the heart of the matter, do you think?
Absolutely. And to make it perhaps even more practical in terms of skills, you could think of it like approaching a conversation as an anthropologist might. Sort of, I'm really interested in what's happening. I'm interested in your worldview. I'm going to approach it with curiosity and try and find out, gosh, it's so different than how I was raised. It's so different than what I'm all about. I just want to hear more from you. Like, how did you arrive at that? What's going on for you? What does that mean to you? Why are these things important to you? And again, it's easier said than done, but I think that if you care about maintaining a relationship with the person, it beats just trying to undermine and refute them at every turn.
Right. Christian, what have you got for a skill you'd like to share?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about two of them. One that's an easy one for me, and one that's very challenging for me. And I've learned through this process of writing as well. So the easy one is acknowledging. We consider that a skill of radical listening because, as I said before, the outcome of radical listening is the person who's been listened to feels seen, valued, and heard. That's the outcome we want. And that's more likely to happen if there's the matching that we talked about. So if you're matching the kind of listening that's most conducive to what the conversational partner wants, you're more likely to get that. And so an important part of it, and this is something listeners, you can start to build into your practice already. You probably already do it, but you could probably dial it up a little bit further. So the skill of acknowledging is really looking for opportunities while you're listening to the other person to show that you've seen and heard them. So you might say something like, gosh, this does sound like a really difficult situation. Or you might highlight something you admire about them. You might say, I really admire your integrity throughout this whole process. You've stayed true to your values. Those small acknowledgments that we're making will have two effects. One is the person you're listening to feels that you see them and value what it is that they're bringing. But the other is it shows that you're fully invested in the conversation, that you're listening carefully because you're picking out those things. So the skill of acknowledging is simply being explicit. And Robert and I would urge doing it more than you normally would. Because often we might think, oh, this other person knows that I value them. This other person knows that I appreciate them. But it's one of those cases where doing it more is not going to cause damage, while not doing it may inadvertently cause damage. And I'm talking like in examples where people might think, well, this person's taken me for granted now. They don't continually say, hey, I really admire this. So the skill of acknowledging, and I have to say, it's one of my favorite skills. It comes naturally to me. I like that. I like people. I appreciate people. So this one comes easily to me. It's not
Do you mind if
affect-
I jump in, Christian? I'm
Sure.
sorry. I want to add before you go on to the next
Yes,
skill.
please, because the next one is interjection. So, Robert, you're demonstrating this for us now.
Excellent. I think there are some times that people do some things that feel like acknowledgement that are very well intentioned, but that can sometimes go off the rails. And two of these we call comparing and competing. So someone might be telling you a story. Oh, I went to Hong Kong last summer, and you blurt out, "Wow, you know what? I went to Hong Kong last summer," and that feels to you like an acknowledgement of their experience. And you're trying to find common ground. It's motivated by a sense of connection. We have something in common here. And yet it runs the risk of sort of making it about you, taking the spotlight away from them. It can feel like an interruption. It doesn't necessarily, but it runs that risk. And then its conceptual cousin, competing, is very much the same. They say, "Oh, I'm so tired. I only got 6 hours of sleep last night." And you're like, 6 hours of sleep? I only got 4 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
And again, you're trying to get across to them, I acknowledge you, I understand, I also am sleep deprived, but it runs the risk again by saying, oh, I'm playing a game of one-upsmanship. So sometimes acknowledgement feels like what we're doing, but it doesn't always land that way.
I guess that comes back to your intentionality. If the purpose of the conversation is to acknowledge or to connect competition isn't really a connection. And it's more about you than about them. So I think I can see how all these pieces kind of fit together. Do either of you want to say any more about interjecting? Because I'd like to go into that a little deeper. And it was really nice of you to demonstrate interrupting as we transition to talking about it.
Thank you. I do want to jump
Yeah,
in.
go
That
ahead.
was going to be the second skill I wanted to mention, Jim, because I do find it difficult. So, like I said, the acknowledgement thing, I feel it comes naturally to me. I like doing it. I've had a long life experience of doing that and finding benefits for me and my conversational partner of doing it. Whereas, my mother, the person who brought me up, was Japanese, and she definitely taught me, you never interrupt. And then as I became a coach and I started training other people to become coaches, I was very clear. Part of listening is you just keep quiet. You don't say anything. So, but as we were writing this book, it really became apparent. And maybe this is one element, Jim, of what's radical about this kind of listening, is that we go beyond that kind of rule of turn taking. The rule is the other person's talking, so I mustn't say anything. That's probably good listening, but it's not radical listening. Radical listening is being willing to jump in. That's what we're talking about. With minimal interruptions, or minimal encouragers are a great example, Jim. So if my conversational partner is talking about something, I might want to jump in and say, wow, I can't believe you did that. Or did you celebrate that? Or how amazing was that? And coming back to your point, Jim, it's not interrupting in order to take the floor or take the microphone from the other person. In fact, it's the opposite. It's we're jumping in because we want them to see that we're fully committed, we're with them. In fact, Jim, I would say that that's the message we're trying to convey all the time in radical listening is, I'm with you. I'm right there. I'm with you. So to look at it another way, the way that I would have done it in the past is somebody's mentioned Hong Kong, and I just want to say how amazing it was. I'll wait till they get to the end of what they have to say and then say, oh, you mentioned Hong Kong a bit earlier. Tell me more about that. I've missed the moment. So this is really about showing full interest, full engagement. And the purpose of the interjecting is to get them to be even more enthusiastic and say even more. So we're creating more space for them by jumping in. So that's how I would explain interjection. Robert, do you want to add anything to that?
I have a few things to add. Yeah, thank you. First, I think that we all interrupt all the time. This goes back to Christian's comment about using minimal encouragers like or wow, or I see. When you do that, you're often speaking over the other person or speaking simultaneously to the other person, but those are almost never considered interruptions. People don't even clock them as interruptions because you're not taking the turn away from them. They still have the opportunity to speak. So they're not considered as rude. If you just start lecturing them, then that is seen as rude because you've robbed them of the podium, as it were. I think that interjection can be so helpful to people, and I would even call it interruption can be so helpful to people, because imagine someone is saying something and they just said something amazing. This calls for what Christian would say is an emphatic interruption. You want to emphasize, just underscore exactly what they said. Like, wow, did you hear what you just said? That sounds important. But in a turn-based culture, what normally happens is we wait and they talk for another 5 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever it is. And then we say, could we go back to something you said 3 minutes ago? And that can feel a little bit disheartening to a speaker. I know that when that happens to me, I feel like, well, why didn't you jump in? Like, why did you let me talk for another 3 minutes? Just saying superfluous words when really the thing that we want to address happened 3 minutes ago.
Yeah, so I was reading your section. I was thinking about Kate Murphy's distinction between switch responses and support responses. So support response is where essentially you amplify what the person's saying. And a switch response, I think your terms you both use is you take the mic away from the other person. So if someone says to you, I'm really worried about my mom. She's just having trouble, taking care of herself and doing things. And she's so stubborn. She doesn't want to move out, but I'm not sure what I'm going to do. And a switch response would be, oh man, I had the same problem with my mom 5 years ago. What we eventually did, and now the conversation's mine. And then a support response would be, gosh, that must be hard. How are you coping? You stay with them where they are. And what I'm hearing from you is not just support, but amplification. We can bring it out even stronger in what they're saying. So an interjection, I'm breaking out in hives when I talk about interruptions, but interjection could actually amplify if it helps the person say more, it's been helpful. If it shuts them down and interrupts their thinking, it's probably not that helpful. Is that a fair way of putting it, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great frame for people. It's pithy, they can understand it. I think there are types of interruptions we do that extend even beyond those. One example is interrupting to entertain. So funny people, for example, are listening for pauses in conversation because pauses are where you insert jokes. And so sometimes you're not looking either to switch the conversation or necessarily to support or amplify what the person said, but you're sort of strategically placing a lighter moment in or a funny kind of thing. Sometimes we do an aside. If there's, 3 people or more in a conversation, you might do a strategic aside to someone else in a conversation. So there are many types of interruptions that actually could be helpful either for learning, for connection, that are not considered rude.
Yeah. And Jim, as I reflect on our writing process, Robert, I think we tried a lot of these things. We definitely listened radically to one another. We were actually in Canada, in Squamish, coming up with some of the bigger ideas behind this. And I do remember we were making sure that we did what we're talking about here. And the interjection thing worked in when we were trying to generate lots of different ideas. And I remember, Robert, we were kind of throwing words around, and I might be mid-sentence saying, I wonder, should we use interjection? And Robert would come in and say, well, isn't more interruption? So it can actually generate creativity. It can generate lots of ideas. And I also come out in hives, Jim, with interruption, which is probably why we landed on interjection as the title. That's the one that I think I was pretty keen to keep interjection, but there's another skill called quieting, which is an example of where Robert won out of because I like the word quietening. I always think, and just since I mentioned it, Jim, if I may, I just wanted to tell the listeners about this skill. There's 2 kind of sides to the quieting skill. One is showing the conversational partner that you think the conversation is important enough to try and create the right environment for you to be able to listen to them. So an example of that is when you sit down with somebody, putting your mobile phone away, for example. That's evidence to say, look, this is such an important conversation. I don't want this to distract me. Or saying to somebody, should we go somewhere a little bit quieter so I can actually hear what you're saying? That's the external part of quieting. But the more complex and more nuanced one is the internal quieting. And that's really requires radical listeners to find ways to make sure that their inner dialogue, the inner talk that's going on, some of the barriers that Robert talked about, the comparing, competing, making sure those things don't get in the way. And if our listeners now want to do a little sense check of what are the kinds of situations where they know they're less likely to listen. I hope this is a challenging provocation for people, but I think we all know. We know, okay, that kind of conversation with that type of person, that's going to be difficult for me to listen to them. it's doing some preparatory work there to make sure if you know that already, then that's an example of you need to find ways to quiet the things that are getting in the way of you giving somebody your full attention.
Well, the last thing I want to ask about is the subtitle of the book. And I've got it written down here. The subtitle is The Art of True Connection. So what makes connection true, and how does listening shape that kind of connection?
I think this is something that Christian mentioned earlier, and it is the idea that you get the best alignment, your word, Jim, when the conversational speaker wants something from the listener and the listener's intention matches that. So if I'm at home and I'm complaining that I can't move my heavy sofa from one room to another, I don't want listeners to come in and just give me empathy, like, wow, Robert, that's so difficult. I'm so sorry you're experiencing that. I want them to roll up their sleeves, grab one end of the sofa and move it. And so we want to keep an ear out for what it is that the speaker is pulling for, but we also want to have sort of our own intention, because again, that will guide our intention. The more aligned we are, the more connection we'll feel.
Yeah, and if I may add to that, Jim, again, just to give people an insight, we started with we're writing a book about listening. So that was the starting point. The word radical came in later, and I do think it was about we felt that what we were talking about was needed now. We really thought we need to cut through some of the other stuff. This isn't about being polite with. This is about really thinking of listening as a powerful intervention. So that's where radical came in. But even at that point, Jim, I mean, we didn't have a subtitle. And the subtitle probably, correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, but it probably came like 6 months into the process. We were right in the, we'd already written most of the book. And it was Robert who put something out on LinkedIn, who said, here's some possible subtitles for the book. Would you like to vote on it? And I think it was a huge majority, like 70% of people loved the subtitle, Art of True Connection. And Robert said to me, hey, Christian, I did this thing. People that like this subtitle. And of course, our instinct is always go with what the reader wants. But to be honest with you, that's the first time I really got the book. I got it. I was like, okay, this is what it's really about, the art of true connection. And in the kind of the world right now where we've got a loneliness pandemic, we've got miscommunication, we've got division and conflict, we really felt we wanted people to be hopeful. And the reason to be hopeful is that we're saying that you can start to make a difference already. You can be proactive by starting to do radical listening with others. So for us, radical listening, the art of true connection, it's really just the starting point. It's like the match or something. And what we're trying to get to is dialogue. That's where we're headed. And our argument would be that if you connect with someone for whom you think, well, it's either the relationship or is important, or we can't carry on like this. We can't carry on with like this. So something has to change. Well, in those situations, I would say we can be proactive and say, I'm going to reach out and say, hey, I'm going to listen to you. Like we said, Jim, this idea of it being a mutually humanizing conversation. And then our hope is that if I listen to somebody else with a very different view to mine in this way, I think that there's a higher chance that they might say, oh, Christian, what about you? Because we were saying earlier, we're saying to the other person, you have a right to this opinion. I don't agree with you, but tell me, I'm curious. We hope that the conversational partner will return that to say, well, how did you get to your point of view? So we really see radical listening. It builds that initial connection upon which dialogue can be built.
Well, I love it. I love that it all comes together, of course. Acknowledging, accepting, noticing are all ways of connecting. And it's pretty hard to have a deep connection with someone when you're not listening to them. So it really is about, I think the first step towards that deep connection is going to have to be the way you acknowledge, respond, take in, and maybe interrupt them. That's possible. So thank you
Interject.
both. Thank you both so much. I love the book. It's just practical, but not overly simplistic, provocative, without getting in the way of experiencing the book. So I just loved it. I'm very grateful for both of you for writing it and for having this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jim. Thanks, Robert.